All righty. All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to take a minute to introduce Kapala Consulting Group, our speaker today, and some logistics for the session. My name is Doug Smalley. I'm co-founder of Kapala Consulting Group along with my wife, Anu Smalley. Our mission at Kapala Consulting is to assist organizations and individuals maximize their capability in their unique journeys in Agile and in life. Anu is a certified Scrum trainer and Agile consultant focused on Agile training, coaching, and enterprise Agile transformations. She is just one of a handful of certified and licensed trainers to provide all available Scrum Alliance courses. She is an experienced Agile and leadership coach as well, having coached teams, team roles, leadership levels, all the way up through the C-suite. Kapala Consulting Group, as an organization, we have a broad network of Agilists whom we work with to provide our clients in the Agile community the assistance that they need to be successful in meeting their goals. So with us today is Lucy O'Keefe. She's going to speak on the topic of the Scrum Master's role as a facilitator. Lucy is a certified Scrum professional and the owner and president of Dart Frog Consulting. She's in the midst of her own journey to become a certified Scrum trainer. Lucy's been working in the Agile space since 2012 and has been involved with Scrum teams as a developer, product owner, Scrum Master, and coach. Her career has spanned over 25 years in IT and has experience in the software, nonprofit, and financial services industries. So she's extremely passionate about the Scrum Master role and really enjoys helping Scrum Masters drive change within their organizations. So thank you for joining us today, Lucy. I will be your facilitator today, assisting Lucy. The presentation is roughly about 40 minutes, followed by a short Q&A at the end. All attendees, I'm going to have everyone muted just to avoid disruptions during the presentation by Lucy. While we won't be stopping for questions during the presentation, you can enter a question in the chat window at any point, and we will try to get to it, time permitting, at the end during the Q&A period. And as a follow-up for us, we will review all the questions that you provide in the chat window and provide some responses via a blog after the fact. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Lucy.
Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that introduction. And I'm really happy to be here and to be partnering with Kapala Consulting. Anu and I have worked together for quite a long time now. Anu is actually my mentor, so I'm really happy to be here and be doing the first in our series of webinars for Kapala Consulting. As Doug said, I'm extremely passionate about the Scrum Master role and about educating others on how important this role is within an organization. And I just couldn't let this opportunity pass me by without talking about one of the competencies within this role. So as he said, today we're going to be talking about the Scrum Master as facilitator. But before we start talking about that, I'm going to ask Doug to actually open the chat room so that everyone can see the answers that I'm going to ask for. So I would love for you all to just jot down in the chat at least one misconception that you've heard about the Scrum Master role. All we do is schedule meetings. Yep. Meeting scheduler, note taker. It's not necessary, Todd. Yep. Manager, secretary, have all the answers. Team admin, glorified secretaries. Yeah, I hear that a lot, April. Needs to be technical. Yep. So there is a lot. So before we actually jump into the facilitator, primary decision maker for the team. Yep. There is a lot out there. So let me just go into the misconceptions, right? There's a lot of things that you all have talked about, all the misconceptions of this role. So the Scrum Master really, they think that it goes beyond, goes from being responsible for extremely simple tasks to actually owning the team, as somebody said, right? They're the master of the team, they own the team. And of course, with these misconceptions come loads of questions ranging from, why do we need a Scrum Master? I've heard that plenty of times, right? Or why do Scrum Masters make so much money if this is all they do? I get that all the time in the organization where I currently am. So we get meeting organizer, like you said, time box enforcer, project manager, delivery lead, impediment remover, tool administrator, secretary, scribe, team boss. And it's crazy, right? Because Scrum Masters do a lot more than that. So to
Hey, Lucy, I accidentally,
did you mute me, Doug?
there was a glitch, yes, with my fingers, and I accidentally muted you. Sorry for that.
Okay.
I was trying to let someone in.
No worries, no worries. Alrighty, so I'll start this one over. Yes, Todd, I just went on mute. I don't want to talk to you anymore. So how do we overcome those misconceptions that we were talking about? So one of the ways that we overcome those misconceptions as a Scrum Master is by wearing these 4 different hats, or having these 4 competencies that the Scrum Master has. So the Scrum Master has to act as a facilitator, a coach, a trainer, and a mentor. And the Scrum Master really has to know when to don each hat, depending on the circumstances that they're in. So today we are going to cover only the role of the facilitator. We are going to have more webinars in the future where we are going to cover the other 3 competencies, but today that is all that we are going to focus on. So what does it mean to be a facilitator as a Scrum Master, right? When we wear that facilitator hat, we need to be, 1, a neutral party. We have to be empathetic. We have to be the timekeeper, the active listener, the conflict resolver, and the consensus builder. And we're going to go into each one of these individually so we can learn a little bit more about each one of these characteristics. So what does it mean to be a neutral party? So a neutral party is unbiased. Of course, you have no skin in the game and you don't participate. That's one of the things that a lot of Scrum Masters don't understand, that since you are a facilitator, you cannot participate in your own meetings. You're just there to facilitate. You don't take sides, you don't play favorites, regardless of the position in the organization of someone that's giving their opinion. If you have the president or CEO in one of the meetings that you're facilitating, you still don't take sides. They are treated just like everybody else. Being neutral also means that you are tolerant regardless of how you feel about the comments or perspectives of another person. If you don't agree with somebody, you don't let that be known. You're neutral. It also means that you don't support any one party when there is a conflict or disagreement. You don't say or do anything that would encourage or discourage anyone in an argument. And you would also not help or hinder anybody during that argument or conflict either. So when you are being neutral, you're putting emphasis on the process instead of the outcome. So that's very important to remember. What happens if the Scrum Master doesn't remain neutral while facilitating? Well, the outcome may be that the quality of the decisions being made will be a very poor quality, and the group is no longer going to trust you to facilitate any of those events. So it's very important to stay neutral as a facilitator. The next thing that we are going to talk about is empathy. So the Scrum Master, when they have the hat of the facilitator on, they need to be empathetic. And to quote Alfred Adler, empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. So trying to experience things from another person's perspective. And when we do that, it can give you a whole new appreciation for that person. So it's all about putting yourself in another person's position. You understand what the other person is feeling, but you don't necessarily go there with them. Instead, you view them as capable of working through that issue at hand, and you just help them through that. There are 4 qualities that I'd like to go over with you when it comes to empathy. So the first one is adopting perspectives. The ability to adopt the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their own truth. That's what adopting perspectives is. Avoiding judgment. So when you're being empathetic, you can't judge that person. So it's your ability to not judge someone's behavior as right or wrong in order to meet the person eye to eye. The next quality is recognizing emotion in other people. Accepting that everyone has the right to feel what they feel and that those are authentic feelings and they should be taken seriously. And the last characteristic is communicating this recognition. So making it clear to the other person that they're perfectly entitled to their own perspective and feelings, and that they have someone who they can listen to. So that's what it means to be empathetic. So it's very important when you're facilitating meetings or facilitating conflict that you are being empathetic to all of the parties within that conversation. The next thing we need to be when we are being facilitators as a Scrum Master is a timekeeper. So when we think of the Scrum Master of the timekeeper, what's the first thing that comes to mind, right? It's time boxes. We have all these time boxes that we have to make sure that everyone is respecting when it comes to all our Scrum events. But of course, this is not just for Scrum events. It's for any other meeting or conflict that you're facilitating. But to be the timekeeper also means ensuring that the meeting is moving along, right? That it keeps moving along and that people don't go off tangents or don't go down rabbit holes. So how do we do that? In order to rein in your chatty attendees, one, you have to remind the attendees of the objective of the meeting, right? You need to make sure that everyone understands the reason why we are there. So that's part of timekeeping. Keep a parking lot. If people go off on tangents or down rabbit holes and are talking about something that's completely different from the objective of the meeting, make sure that you have a place where you can note down those items and that we can have a conversation about them later. Politely redirect the conversation. So make sure that people understand that that there's something else that needs to be talked about, but then bring them back to the objective at hand. And of course, remind the attendees of time. Right? There's always a time box for everything. So if we only have a certain amount of time left, we need to make sure that they understand, we only have 15 minutes left. Let's talk about this offline or talk about it in another meeting. Let's make sure that we reach the consensus we need to reach today, so that they understand why we are redirecting the conversation. So that's the timekeeping part. The other key to being a good facilitator is to being a good active listener. So there's key active listening skills that I'd like to go over with you. The first one is pay attention. So listen to understand and not respond. Don't cut people off. How many times do you hear yourself inside your head, right, when somebody's talking, just thinking about what answer you want to give them? I know I'm guilty of that. Right. A lot of times I'm listening to somebody speak and I'm like, oh, but I want to say this and I want to say that, or they're wrong. I need to give them my opinion. So a lot of times we are not listening to understand. We're just listening to respond. So we have to be very cognizant of that and make sure that we're listening to understand, right? We're not just hearing what they're saying. We're really listening to them. Focus on the moment and be respectful. So that's part of paying attention. Withhold judgment. So that's hard sometimes as well, right? Because you have your own perspectives and your own thoughts about the things that you believe in. So it's very important to have an open mind. Be open-minded be open to other ideas, to new perspectives. Understand that diversity is a great thing, right? And the diversity of thought is a very important thing. If we all thought exactly the same way, it would be a very boring world, right? So make sure that you are open-minded, hold your criticism, avoid argument with others. And so that's a great way to withhold judgment. So the other thing we want to do is to reflect. So don't assume that you understand what's being said correctly. Every time you are talking to somebody, make sure that you paraphrase their key points, make sure that they understand that you understand what they're talking about. This ensures that everyone is on the same page. Clarify, make sure that you ask questions. If there's anything that's being said that you don't understand well, or that you see from people's body language that they're not understanding well, make sure that you ask clarifying questions so that the speaker can restate their opinion or what they are trying to say, so that everyone gets on the same page. This encourages problem solving and it focuses on asking instead of telling. Summarize. So once again, we want to restate the key points, and that makes the person that's speaking feel good about the fact that everyone is understanding what they're saying. So restate those key points shared throughout the conversation to ensure that mutual understanding. The next item is to observe body language, right? It is so hard right now in these COVID times when we are not in the same room together, and a lot of times people are not using their video in order to have conversations. So we are missing the nonverbal cues that we can get, when we are having conversations with others. So if you can, make sure that you have your video on so you can observe people's body languages. Sometimes what people are saying verbally is not necessarily how they are feeling. So make sure that you are doing that. These nonverbal indications communicate things that you wouldn't get otherwise. Their intentions may come across through the way that they are looking at you, the way that their voice intonation is, the way that their body is. So pay attention to that, because there can be contradictions between what is coming out verbally and what is coming out non-verbally from the speaker. Another thing is be okay with silence. This is a hard one, I think, for a lot of people. I know that when I first started my journey as a Scrum Master and I would ask people questions and they'd be silent, I would have a really hard time with that. And there were crickets on the line, and all I wanted to do is yell at people and call on people, to have them speak. But we need to understand that silence is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times people need silence in order for them to formulate their thoughts and answer your questions correctly, or how they want to answer it. So you need to give people that chance to better think through what they're going to say. One of the things that I do now, when I'm much more comfortable with silence than I used to be years ago, is I'll ask a question and I'll count to 15 in my head. I'll just breathe through it. I'm not going to get upset about it, but I'll count until 15. And when the 15 minutes are up, I may just move on to another topic. But you need to be comfortable with that. So don't jump in right away if somebody is not answering, because there's many reasons for silence. And I know it is frustrating, but it's something that you need to grow more comfortable with as you become a facilitator. The next thing I want to talk about is conflict resolution skills. So a lot of times Scrum Masters don't want to get involved in conflict. I've seen it many times where there's conflict that arises within a team, for example, and the Scrum Master feels that the first thing that they need to do is go to a manager and talk to a manager about it, because they don't feel that it's their role to resolve conflict. But it is, and we need to become more comfortable with dealing with conflict when that arises, right? We want to make sure that our teams are working as teams. And in order for that to happen, we have to make sure that there is trust amongst everyone in the team. And if you can't resolve conflict, that trust is not going to be there. So the more information that you have about the cause of the problem, the better, right? So define that source of the conflict. When you're trying to define the source of the conflict, make sure that you're asking open-ended questions. When do you feel upset? What are the things that are making you upset? What is causing this conflict? Do you see a relationship between, what you're feeling and what exactly happened? So make sure that you're asking the correct questions, and make sure that both parties that are in conflict understand that you have no skin in the game, right? So it goes back to being neutral. You have to understand from one side and from the other side what the sources are. So that's defining the source of the conflict. The next thing that you want to do is look beyond the incident, right? So often this is not a situation. It's not the situation, but it's the point of view of the situation, right? It's not necessarily what happened, but it's how people feel about what happened. That is a problem. That's what usually leads us to a shouting match or other disruptive results. The source of the conflict might be a minor issue that occurred months before, and sometimes something happens that just triggers the reaction within the group. And the level of stress grows, right, when things like that happen. So make sure that you understand that, and you point back to where the incident was. Make sure that you can get people to look beyond the triggering incident, especially if it's happened so long ago. It's important for them to see that it was something that happened a long time ago. How can we overcome it? So ask both parties, or if there's multiple parties, what do we think happened here? When was the first time that you saw the problem, and how can we move beyond it? So when you ask how can we move beyond it, you're actually requesting solutions from the parties, right? You have to, after you get each party's viewpoints, the next step is to identify how the situation could be changed. So again, you're going to be asking questions. How can you make things better between you, right? And a lot of times you need to find what people have in common. When people find commonalities amongst them, it's much easier to get to a solution when it comes to a conflict. As we said before, when you're being a facilitator, you have to be an active listener and be aware of every single nuance that's coming up during the conversation, as well as being a good reader of the body language. So the things that we just talked about in the previous slide apply here as well. You want to get the people who are in the conflict to stop fighting, start cooperating. And that means that you're steering the discussion away from finger pointing, which is what happens a lot of the time when they have these conflicts. One person saying that the other one did something wrong and vice versa. So we got to move beyond that and move towards resolving the conflict. The next thing that we want to do as a conflict resolver is to identify solutions that everyone can support. So you are listening for the most acceptable course of action. You are going to ask for all parties to give you different solutions. Then you're going to have conversations with both parties to see what works well for both of them. You're going to point out the merits, the pros and cons, right, of the various ideas that come up. And then you're going to have them reach an agreement on what the best solution is. So at the end of the day, when it comes to conflict resolution, we have to get to a place where both parties are able to shake hands, agree to disagree if that's the case, and move on, because otherwise it's going to be very hard for the team to continue working together if there are those types of conflicts. We have to reach that negotiated agreement. Sometimes you have to write up a contract. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it's something that you may want to put in your team working agreement if it's a type of conflict that you see very often in your team. So if it needs to be written, let's go ahead and write that up. But most of the time, hopefully it's just sufficient to meet with the individuals at hand, ask them what action plans they have, what have they put in place to prevent these conflicts from arising in the future, and really just work with them through the conflict and make sure that they are all happy with the solution that we have come up with. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the role of the facilitator as a consensus builder, right? So to achieve consensus, it means that there is overwhelming agreement. And it's not necessarily about being unanimous, right? It doesn't mean that every single person on the team has to agree with everything that's been said, but we have to have an overwhelming agreement, meaning that the majority of the people agree with the solution or the decision that has been made. It should be a good faith effort to meet all the interests of all the stakeholders. When they all reach this consensus, they can live with the decision that has been made, right? So as a consensus builder, the Scrum Master should be familiar with some of the techniques that I have here. The first one is brainstorming. I'm sure many of you have used brainstorming before. You're focusing on quantity. So as many ideas that can come up, that's what you want when you are brainstorming with a group. Encourage wild ideas, right? People don't have to be shy about throwing ideas out there. We want as many ideas as we want. Don't criticize, right? Do not make fun of any ideas that come up, because that's going to keep people from bringing out more ideas. So never judge. And combine and improve ideas, right? There can be multiple people that are giving the same type of ideas. So let's group them together and see what we can come up with. So that's what brainstorming is, right? Really coming up with a ton of different ideas and then focusing on one that works for most of the group. The next one that I want to talk about is mind mapping. So in mind mapping, we are creating a central idea as a starting point. So say, for example, you want to create a mind mapping for a birthday party. You want to do a birthday party for your child, for example. So the mind mapping starts with birthday party as your central idea. Out of that, you're going to create branches out of the central theme about things that you want to happen. Say during that birthday party, right? So food is one of them, drinks is another one of them, entertainment is another one of them. And these will become the first associations to your central idea, which is the birthday party in this case. So out of that branch, you're going to end up creating more and more branches, right? So when it comes to food, you can talk about different types of food. When it comes to drinks, you can talk about different types of drinks, entertainment, same thing, and so on and so forth. And as you build more branches, you're building more and more associations. So you have your first associations, your second associations, and your third associations. And then when you're done mind mapping, the group can make a decision of which branch works the best for them for each one of those. And that's mind mapping. There's a tool called Idea Boards out there that has mind mapping within it. If you've never seen it, it's really easy to use, but it's a great way to decide what it is that you want to do regarding a central idea. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is divergent and convergent thinking. So divergent thinking concentrates on generating a large number of alternatives from multiple perspectives. And convergent thinking is the opposite. It's finding one specific answer. So usually what happens in divergent thinking, you'll get many people with a lot of creativity to come up with a ton of different ideas. And everyone's going to explore those ideas and explore as many solutions that they can find. And then when they do convergent thinking, they organize all those options that have come up in a logical manner in order to find just one single answer. So divergent is a lot of different opportunities or solutions, whereas convergent is just one single answer to to whatever it is that we are trying to decide on. Okay. So we've talked about all the characteristics of a facilitator. So now I'd like to talk about the different facilitation techniques that I've used and others may have used here. So I have a few of them here on this slide. So the first one that I have here is fist to five or fist of five. I've seen it called both things. So fist of five is a technique for quickly getting feedback and engaging consensus during a meeting. The great thing about fist of five is that everybody's gonna answer at the same time, so we don't run the risk of having somebody who's in a lead role giving an answer before everybody else, and then you're going to have followers who answer exactly the same way. So this is a great way to gain consensus immediately at the same time with everyone. So a person would make a statement, and then they would ask everyone to show their level of agreement with that statement by holding up a number of fingers from 1 to 5. So if somebody holds one finger, it means that they don't really agree with the idea. They think that it's maybe a threatening decision and that we shouldn't do it at all. 2 fingers means that they don't like the idea and they prefer to do something different, for example. 3 fingers usually means that they are neutral. The idea is okay. Maybe there's a better idea, maybe not. And somebody who gives 3 fingers usually will go with whatever the majority decides. 4 fingers means that it is a good idea and they have the support of that person. And 5 fingers, it's pretty much, this is an awesome idea. I wish I was the one that thought of it. This is what we should go with. So once everybody gives their fist of 5, the facilitator would count how many 5, 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s there are, and then they would decide how to move forward. And if there's a lot of 5s, then we know that the idea is a good one and we can move forward with that. The next one that I would like to talk about is dot voting. So it's on the top right corner there. So dot voting is a simple tool to be very democratic and prioritize the items or make decisions in a group setting. It's a very easy and straightforward way to narrow down alternatives or converge to a set of concepts or ideas. The way the dot voting works, if you haven't used it, is that there's a ton of different options that are presented by a group, and then each individual is given a set of dots to vote with. So, maybe if there's 10 ideas on the board, every person will get 3 dots that they can place, that they can use to vote. And each person would go up to the ideas that they like the most and vote with the dots. You can put all your dots in one item only, or you can distribute those amongst 3 different ones. And then at the end of the day, after you're done with the dot voting, whatever items receive the most votes are the ones that we are going to go with. So hopefully a lot of you have already used dot voting before, but it's a great way to make sure that we hear, you know, everybody's thoughts and understand how everybody's feeling and go with a solution that makes the most sense for everyone. The next one is majority voting. I think that is pretty self-explanatory. Majority rules in this. So whatever item gets the most votes is the one that we go with. And the last one that we have here is Roman voting, and that's the thumb up, thumb sideways, and thumb down. And Roman voting takes its name from the practice of the Roman emperor holding a thumb up or thumb down to indicate when a gladiator would live or die. So that's where it comes from. It is a technique that's used to quickly arrive at a consensus for agile teams. Everyone votes at the same time. So just like the fist of five, everyone's voting at the same time. So you're not running the risk that somebody with more authority would vote first and everybody would follow. And they would vote with a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumb sideways. If there's more thumbs up, that means that everybody's in agreement. If there are more thumbs down, it means that, you know, most people are in disagreement. And the sideways thumbs just mean that the person is not sure, they couldn't care less, and they'll go with whatever the majority has selected. So if we could use the chat again, what are some facilitation techniques that you have used other than these four that I have presented? Anybody? If you don't have a different one, which one of these four techniques have you used the most? Loudest wins.
Squeaky wheel.
Yep. So I had somebody say, so Mark, if you can unmute Mark, Doug, Mark, that's casting lots. What is that? Can you share that with the group?
I'm totally just trying to add humor to this.
I'm sorry?
I'm totally trying to add humor to this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty then. And loudest wins, that was also to add humor. Okay. So I've also heard of, and I forget the acronym, but it's, you know, whoever makes the most money has the loudest voice, right? So sometimes that's what happens as well. Majority voting, like fist of five.
Sounds pretty consistent.
So it looks like dot voting. Thank you, Christine. Yes, hippo. That's what I was trying to remember. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, a lot of people don't use hippo for that. And Zoom polls. That's a great one. Yeah, if you're having your meetings on Zoom, that's a great way to figure out what the solution should be. But it looks like a lot of you are using mostly fist of five and dot voting, and those are great. Of course, they should be used for different things, right? Fist of five is great if you want the reaction all at once and just one single solution. And dot voting can give you multiple solutions or multiple options. And of course, with dot voting, we do run the risk that if a leader goes up first and votes first, that everybody's going to follow the leader. So hopefully, if you're using dot voting, ask your leaders to go last so that everybody else can vote first and not be not follow what the other people are doing. Great, that's awesome. So I'm glad a lot of you are using a lot of these facilitation techniques, and of course, there's many more that you can Google and find out about. But these are great to use in your meetings when you're trying to to make decisions or get a consensus within the team. So I have some tips and tricks before we finish the webinar, because we want to make sure that we have time for a Q&A as well. But there's some tips and tricks that I'd like to share with you. The first one that I'd like to share is use a talking stick. If we were in person, this would be a lot easier. But if the person that has a talking stick is the person that can speak, right? So that makes sure that a lot of people are not talking one on top of the other. So it's a great way to go about some of the conversations that we need to have in our team meetings. Another thing that goes with this is, if you have a ball, you can throw a ball in a meeting. And that's a great way, not only to make sure that only one person is speaking, but also to make sure that everybody speaks, right? So when one person is done talking, they can use a ball and throw it to somebody else. And, I'm sure there's ways we can do that virtually as well, so that will be the next person to speak. That's something that I've used in daily scrums in the past, for example, so that the developers themselves would facilitate the meeting. And that would be an easy way to get somebody else to talk next. So those are great ways to make sure that only one person's speaking, that everybody talks. The next one, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about being neutral. If you need to participate, find someone else to facilitate. Once again, as a facilitator, you can't participate. And one of the main places where I see this happening is the sprint retrospective. A lot of times as Scrum Masters, we want to have a voice, right? We want to talk about what we saw during the sprint that we think, need to be different. What are the things that we want to fix during the sprint? Yeah, we're not supposed to do that, right? We're supposed to be facilitating and be neutral. But if you truly have to participate in your sprint retrospective or any other meeting, make sure that you find somebody else that can come in and facilitate it for you, whether it be another Scrum Master, an Agile coach, doesn't matter, as long as they can facilitate so that you are able to participate. The next tip that I have for you is also about the sprint retrospective. If you didn't write it, don't move it. So that really has to do with grouping items together during the retrospective, right? So we usually have our team members write down, their ideas or what they did wrong or what they didn't do well, what they did well. And then after that, what we do is we usually group items with other like items. So if you weren't the person that wrote one of the items, don't group it yourself. Make sure that someone on the team, that the person that wrote it is the one that's moving it to the group. So if you didn't write it, don't move it. And the other thing also about the retrospective is ensure that there is at least one actionable item in every retrospective. So every time you have a retrospective and you talk about things that the team could be doing better or things that the team should start doing, that should be an action item that should come out of that meeting. And make sure that you are documenting that item somehow. What I've had my teams do in the past is make sure that that goes back into your backlog so that every sprint the team can select one of the action items from the retrospective and move that into the sprint as something to work on for the betterment of the team. Are there any tips and tricks that any of you have that you would like to share with others in the meeting?
Let me open that. Okay, chat's open up for everyone.
Yep, sorry.
They're thinking.
Count to 15.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I don't think we have any tips and tricks that anyone wants to share at this time.
We have a few popping in.
Adam has assign owners during the retro for their recommendations. Yep, agreed. Keep it interesting, shake it up rather than having the same retro format every time. Yes, Christine, thank you for saying that. And I should have said that as well. So yeah, make sure that for your retrospective that you're doing something different every retrospective. It gets really boring if you're using the same template all the time. If you're doing what went well, what didn't go well, and action items every single time, it's going to get to a point that your team is no longer going to have conversations. You're going to get out of there with absolutely nothing. And there's a ton of different retrospective templates or ideas out there. There's a Agile Retrospectives book that you can look at. There's plenty of websites too that you can go to find out different retrospectives. We have Stop, Start, Continue, Sad, Mad, Glad, the Sailboat Retrospective. So make sure that if you keep using the same retrospective, that you're looking up some other ways to do it, and make sure that we foster some better conversation within our teams during the retro. Team building activities, Elmo, yes, enough. Let's move on. Yes, that's a great one. Easy retro, fun retro, agree. Additional roles assigned, okay. Team building, finding tools that fit needs for virtual and whiteboarding, yes. Mural, also a great one. Fun retro is also a great place to do retrospectives. So great. Thank you everyone for sharing that. Yeah, so a lot of you already know, what to do when it comes to facilitating a retrospective and facilitating your meetings, and that's great. So let's, Doug, let's move on to our Q&A.
Cool. I have a thought on how we could do this. What I'd like to do is, rather than try and, because there are a few questions that popped in through the chat, but I think with the group, we have 61. So I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to allow you guys to unmute yourself. But what I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, just send me a note in the chat, and I will call on the folks in order in which they send me a chat, and then you can just ask your question. It'll be a lot faster than trying to write something out. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. So if you have a question for Lucy, feel free, just send me a quick note, and we have about 10 minutes. We can walk through some of these questions. Oh, let me, hang on one second. I need to allow them to unmute themselves, and I will invite them to unmute. So there's one question while we're waiting. I'll just check from Jamie. Any suggestions for getting the silent people to talk in an online meeting?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and that's one that I've definitely encountered plenty of times. So they are not going to volunteer to talk. All right, so we know that. So one, you have to provide a safe space, right? That's very important. If people don't feel safe speaking, they're not going to speak. So we need to make sure that we're providing a safe space, that there is that psychological safety within the team. And if those things are in place, there's nothing wrong with asking for their opinion. If somebody brings up an idea, there's nothing wrong with saying, so Mary, what are your thoughts on this idea that John has brought up? So that's one way to start getting them to talk. If they're not called upon, they are not going to do it on their own. But asking their opinion is easier and better than just saying, Mary, why don't you give us your opinion? Or what do you think? Right? So ask them about something that somebody else has already talked about, and that'll be easier for them to start sharing, and hopefully it'll make them more comfortable within your teams in order to start speaking up on their own. But it's going to get people who are shyer than other people. It's just trying to figure out what makes them tick, if you will. But I've found that asking for their opinion on what somebody else said usually works.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, did that answer the question?
Yep, it gave me something to think about. Thank you.
Excellent. And then Mark, I have one from you as well. You can chime in, but I'll read it out. Any thoughts, experiences with liberating structures?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Mark asks, why don't you go ahead and ask the question, Mark?
Yeah, sure. So Lucy, liberating structures is kind of a in fad these days. And so I've been experimenting with some, and just know if you've had any successes or anything to share with us on using those.
Yeah, so I can't say that I've used those, so I am not going to pretend that I have an answer on that. But we're connected on LinkedIn. Reach out to me and let me let me read out on that and we can chat about that after.
Can I go ahead and hit my second question?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So how about advice for a team that doesn't like to have fun? I'm the type person that I just have a lighthearted personality to me. And so I've tried different exercises to help the team to have fun, but team members just, that's not in their personality.
Okay, have you
Any
asked
suggestions?
the team what they like to do to have fun?
I have not.
Just instead of just, doing what you think is fun, I would try to figure out what they feel is fun, right? And then once you get those ideas, then you can try doing something that'll be fun for them and not necessarily fun just for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Malika.
So my question is, are there any tips on things you should do prior to facilitating your first Scrum event?
So what I would say, one of the things that I would say is understand the objective of that Scrum event. Because if you don't understand the objective of the Scrum event, you're not going to be able to facilitate it well. So make sure you understand what that is, understand the facilitation techniques that are available to you, know your people, know what's going to work for them. So those are the things that I would say, but just, for me, the top is ensuring that you understand what the objective of the meeting is, regardless whether it's a Scrum event or not, so that you're driving the group towards that objective throughout the meeting.
Jamie has another question. Hopefully, Malika, that answered your question.
Malika, does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm back on mute. Yes, that is. Thank you.
Okay, Jamie, did you want to read your next one?
Okay. I don't know if this is off topic, but there was a few things that you said today that made me think this is kind of relevant. The Scrum Guide just changed last November, and they say Scrum Masters are not servant leaders anymore. We are leaders who serve. And this is apparently not just a word mumbo jumbo. There's a difference to that. And so how does the idea of us being more leaders now work into being neutral in Scrum, in our Scrums and our meetings and things like that, and being a facilitator?
Right. So the word has changed, but I don't think the meaning has, right? And I think one of the reasons that they changed from servant leader to leader who serves is because a lot of Scrum Masters have focused so much on the servant part of servant leadership and giving the team and others what they want and not necessarily what they need. But for me, a leader always serves first, right? So a leader is not about managing. There's a huge difference between being a manager and being a leader, right? So a leader is about influence, and it's not about authority. So even though the word has changed, the meaning has not changed. We are still servant leaders, if you think about it, but it's really focusing on the leadership part, right? Making sure that we are still holding people accountable, making sure that people understand the expectations of their role within Scrum, because I think a lot of Scrum Masters tended to forget that when they focused on the servant leadership side of it. Does that answer your question, Jamie?
Yeah, especially the comment about it's not about influence, it's about authority. That really sticks out. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Shelby has a question.
Yeah, so I tried to summarize it in the chat,
That's
but it obviously wasn't fully working. So when you're in a meeting and you're actively facilitating and you identify a moment where there's a coaching opportunity, what techniques do you have to hold it on pause and remember to follow up later when you lose in the moment that example firsthand? Or do you disrupt the meeting and be like, hey, quick coaching moment, let's pause and let's handle this? Because a lot of my teams, we don't get a lot of time together right now just in our organization outside of the scheduled ceremonies and activities. Unfortunately, they're more of a services team. Right. So we don't have a lot of that team time for just like open discussion and coaching unless I'm like one-on-one with a person. So curious if you have any suggestions for that.
So I think it is perfectly okay to switch hats during a meeting as long as you're keeping in mind the time box, right?
Yeah.
Of course, if it is during the daily scrum and the team is very close to the 15 minutes, I probably wouldn't switch my hat right then and there.
Yeah.
But ask people to maybe stay after the daily scrum is done and talk about the coaching moment that you saw. But
Yeah.
perfectly okay if it's not in the daily scrum and you're running out of time to switch hats when that occurs, because a lot of times when it's in the moment, people are going to learn even more.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about. Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Christy has a question. Christy Bronson.
Hi guys. I have a question. I'm actually on here with one of my colleagues and we were Skyping back and forth, and we don't currently work within Scrum framework, but we're learning about it. And we do work on a cross-functional team. It's not a development team, but operates so closely to development team. So that's why I got my Scrum Master certification, and our new manager actually is a CSM as well. But the thing that we're running into is that there are some members on the teams that are burnt out, and it's very clear that they don't want to engage. We kind of anticipate maybe they want to leave the team or leave the company. And my question is, how could you as a facilitator still, I guess, promote a healthy, engaging environment despite those challenges?
Right. So I think we need to step back a little bit and understand why this is happening, right? So the first thing that jumped at me that you said is that they're experiencing burnout.
Yep.
So my question for you is, why are they experiencing burnout? Are they bringing in more work than that? And I know you said you're not really necessarily doing Scrum right now, but are they working overtime consistently? Are people telling them that they need to get more things done than what they are able to do? What is the reason for that burnout?
So Keith, who's on this call too, he just Skyped me. He's saying it's lack of interest. With the teams that we work with, the specialist teams work on a pull system. So just like a dev team would, right? Mm-hmm. And then the PMs ours is definitely a push. So we have executives that are pushing for has to happen within this timeline. We work in implementations with a piece of software that is very configurable. So each project that you do, it very much is like if you're developing, a very customized expense management system. So PMs experience that push, and the support teams work off a pull system. So that I think naturally creates a little bit of conflict, but I think the ones that are really having the lack of interest, it's because they're not really bought into wanting to be a project manager.
And that's definitely a problem, right? And I don't think that necessarily falls within the hat of the facilitator, right? With the Scrum. I think that there's other things that come into play, right? The coaching part, the trainer part, that'll come into play here. But the one thing that I would say is, if we want these people to not be feeling this way and to be more engaged, the one thing that I would suggest is try to figure out an activity where you can get all these people together, like maybe a happy hour. Even though it's virtual, right? How can we do a happy hour virtually to get these people communicating with each other, working together, feeling better about working with each other? Because sometimes it's not necessarily about not liking the work. It's that you're not comfortable with the people, right? And I think that the more that the happier you are with the people that you're working with, the easier it's going to be, to do the work that you're being asked to do. So that's one of the first things that I would probably do, and trying to understand them, right? Because if you're not having those conversations, and conversations are so important, regardless of whether you're doing Scrum or not, right? It's so important to have those conversations and truly understand where people are, and And, we talked about, the empathy part. I think that's a great thing to maybe apply here and try to understand where they're coming from and then try to figure out the best solution. But those conversations need to happen and that team environment also needs to exist.
Awesome. So our new manager, the very first thing that she did was she set up, she calls them blank space or white space meetings where we're not allowed to talk about it. So we're going to do that once a week for an hour. So that's right in line with what you're talking about.
That would be a great place to get this going.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I thought I'd just throw you that curveball since we're already trying to figure it out.
No, that's great questions, fantastic dialogue. We are up at the top of the hour, just a couple of minutes left. I do want to provide a little bit of information. Of course, the plug, find us on LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn. You'll find us at Kapala. I'm going to drop a couple of links into the chat window. The first is the registration for our March webinar, which is the 5 Ps of product ownership. And Anu will be the one presenting there. And we also have a survey link for today's session. And if you don't mind, just hit that, give us some feedback. We're looking to see how we can make these webinars an excellent experience and obviously inspect and adapt. So with that, thank you, Lucy. Thank you everyone for joining today. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all in March.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anua, Doug, and Lucy. Great session. Thank you.
All right.
Welcome.
See you in March, Malu.
Yeah.